am your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. This was a good one. If you are new to the show, if you are new to the audio-only edition of the podcast, on Wednesdays, if you're a patron, this is Tuesday for you. If you want to get these episodes a day early, you can become a patron. Patreon.com/Bitter Lake Presents. Wherever you're listening to this, there's links in the description to our Patreon. But this is our Saturday free show, so the Saturday show goes a lot longer. We try to get at least an hour and a half in for the Saturday free show. And we had a woman I saw a while ago when our good friend of show, now the host of Diet Soap, he's also premiering his Critical Cuts on our YouTube channel, Doug Lane. So if you want to watch the Critical Cuts from Doug Lane's Diet Soap, youtube.com/This is Revolution Podcast. But I saw Doug interview Christine Louis-Dit-Sully because she had a book about kind of getting beyond race and calling out a lot of the problems that she had with the anti-racism politics, rhetoric, I should say. And the book was on Zero Books, and as you know, or maybe you guys don't know, Doug Lane was a publisher for Zero Books for many years and ran their social media. So Doug had a pretty good interview with Christine, and I saw the interview and requested her friendship on Facebook, and I guess we had enough mutuals, and she said yeah, and I follow her a little bit on social media. She's a very interesting person. I believe she got her second PhD at 59. She worked in the medical field, or medical research, biological research, for quite some time. And I knew Pascal was going to really love this one. And typical of what happens when you have all the ducks in the row, I got all the pre-done questions set up. All of a sudden, I've fixed some issues I've been having with my computers, plural. Even people are commenting in the chat, holy moly, Jason finally looks clear. We think he moved to Cuba. I did not move to Cuba, by the way, but I do not live in the United States anymore. But not Cuba, but that was funny because it does look very Cubanish, I guess, behind me. But I do live in coastal Mexico. Anyways, neither here nor there. Everything is ready to go. We're all great. And then, bam, our guest is having every technical issue you can imagine, sonically. So we can see her just fine. And you know what really sucks? We were talking off air for probably 10 or 15 minutes before the show started, having a great time. I got her all set up and ready to go because I had these pre-written questions. I was up all night reading her book and getting ready for the show, doing my show prep, right? And I woke up in the morning, and about 3 a.m., I get the LA Times every morning, and sometimes I skim through the headlines just to see what's the headlines of the LA Times. I get it because they do pretty good work when it comes to the unhoused and just housing in California. I shouldn't say pretty good. They do good work when it comes to that, covering that. And the headline is, I forget what the headline is. I don't have it in front of me as I'm doing this voiceover. But basically, as you're going to hear the stories of this podcast, we're dealing with Christine's sound issues, right? There was a theater department at Coastal Carolina University. A visiting professor came in, and they wanted to speak with some of the non-white students. They just wanted to connect with them. And they asked someone, can I get the names of the non-white students in this class? And Person wrote their names down on a whiteboard. They left for lunch, forgot to erase it, didn't think anything of it. Black students come in, they see their names on the board, they immediately think that there's something racist going on. The school does an investigation. They find out it's an oopsie. The teacher that does it says, I'm so sorry, sends out a mass email to everybody, hey, there was no racism. There was just a mistake. We're so sorry if anyone was offended. The teacher goes, I'm an idiot. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend anybody. And another professor in the department read what happened and then did a reply all email saying that basically that they're a bunch of snowflakes and need to get over it. And our conversation kind of takes off from there. If you want to see this show, because you have to see Christine's face as I'm reading this article, she can't keep her face together. It is kind of funny. YouTube.com/This is Revolution Podcast. Tuesday through Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific Time, and Saturday, 9 a.m. Pacific Time, is when we air new episodes. And we are really trying. We're doing a ton of pre-records. Like, we're pretty much recording episodes like every day throughout the day, so you guys can get fresh new content while we are trying to take a bit of a year-end break and a production break as things are changing for the better within the show. We're adding new shows constantly, so stay tuned. There's some really cool stuff coming in the new year. So this was a great interview. The book is great. Wherever you're listening to the show, there's links in the description to Christine's book. I am out. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles, and boy, do we have an exciting show for you today. If you haven't done it already, please hit the like and subscribe button. Don't forget to ring that bell so you can get notified every time we go live, as we are constantly adding new shows to our YouTube channel. I think I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that we are going to be airing Doug Lane's Critical Cuts. Excuse me. You may know Doug from his work at Zero Books, and one of the best things that Doug did at Zero Books was the Critical Cuts. And we're going to be airing them here on this channel. I believe Monday will be the first day that we air them. I don't remember the time, but if you hit the bell, you'll definitely get alerted of that. And also, we're adding new shows. We're going to be adding a sports show in the coming weeks. And one of the guest hosts today is going to be a very integral part of that sports show, if not the main part of that sports show. So without any further ado, let me bring in my homie, my dog. He is the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He is the Pascal Robert. Give it up.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
So today is like diversity day across the internet, huh? It's just
I know. See,
diversity and inclusion.
I know. Everyone's talking about the DEI.
Look, Strom. We have to put this on the screen. Look at crazy ass Strom. True enemies of the lane wind up slain. Well, Doug is going to be doing a lot of stuff on the channel. We're actually, I talked with Doug yesterday for a long time about an idea that I have that is partially inspired by the wonderful people that watch this show, about literally doing a diners tour around the US of A. And Doug and I and Ben Burgess and I and a bunch of other people were talking about it. So I'm looking forward to actually rolling that out probably sooner than later. I might even say something I will be doing next week with a bunch of these other internet cats that kind of plays into that. Also, we have to bring in the other important person for these Saturday shows. Pascal, what is going on in your background? I think you got a meeting in the ladies' room. Uh-oh. He used to be the only black man in Maine. Now he is one of many in Virginia, but he is maybe the 7th most important black person on his floor. Not even in the building, just on his floor. He is Marcus of the Left Flank Bets.
What's up? And I do want to correct you on one thing. For the sports show, I won't be the most important. Here at This Is Revolution is a revolution in and of itself, as having white men front some of these shows. So, like you said, Doug Lane is going to be having a show on here. And Mac, who used to have his own podcast, this is You Don't Know History.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, good dude. Very, very white. But he's
Is he white? I thought he was some sort of ethnic.
Is Irish? Is Irish and ethnic?
I thought he was some sort of it was the hair, maybe. I was like, oh, maybe this gentleman is some sort of ethnic. Maybe he's from Irakistan.
No.
He's not from Irakistan. Damn it.
McGinnis.
Well, our guest today actually did have a book on Zero Books. It was interviewed by Doug Lane, and that was my first time seeing her. I thought the book title was interesting. Christine Louis-Dit-Sully grew up in the banlieue 93, a working class area near Paris, France, that used to be demonized, but she has since also lived in the UK, US, and Germany. She worked for nearly 20 years in academia, biological research. Since leaving her laboratory bench career, she has widened her field of research to politics and the humanities. Her research for her second PhD started with her looking at the demand for safe space in US and UK universities. It led her to examine important issues such as identity, the self, race, citizenship, the meaning of politics, and identity politics. After reading some of the books and articles published today, she wrote her first book to remind herself and others that there have been and there are other ways of understanding the world around us. She is the author of Transcending Racial Divisions. Will you stand by me? I want Pascal to say her name because I love it when you say it with the French accent.
Christine Louis-Dit-Sully.
There she is. Bonjour.
Yeah, I'm here, but I'm sorry to say, I'm hearing echoes.
You're hearing echoes?
Yes. So I'm hearing your voice and even my voice.
Okay. You might want to turn something down on your end then.
They are using this because they've got you.
It wasn't the same earlier.
Let's give her 1 second while she fixes that echo problem.
I don't know. That's weird. Is something changed like when you went live?
I don't know. Maybe something changed when we went live. We were talking off air and everything was fine.
Yeah.
Oh, she might have the YouTube open. Can you and Pascal talk for a second while I try to hammer this out with her?
Yes.
Not a problem. Marcus.
What's up, Pascal? It's been a while. It's been a few weeks. How you been?
It's been a long time, man. We haven't chatted in quite a while, brother. What have you been up to?
Just keeping some things going. Actually, had a few interesting conversations with a few hip hop artists recently.
Dealing with some of the hip hop artists from the Up Jump the Boogie to the Bang Bang Boogity beat there.
Yeah, well, your boy Napoleon the Legend came out with a new album.
I heard
recently.
about that. Well, how is it? I heard it's probably going to be fire.
It's good. I think honestly, it reminded me of like actual like good 90s hip hop albums. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Like I felt like opening up a CD case and I was like flipping through, like it is. Yeah, it's just very dope. But it's called The World Changed, and it goes through a lot. There's a few. Superfly is one song where, yeah, man, this dude Amerigo Gazaway, who was a producer, he definitely got the feeling. So that was dope. And that dude A1, who's an independent rapper, but like the motherfucker does numbers, crazy download numbers. So talking about how he's doing it with independent touch was a pretty good one.
Okay.
But
were you still working with Karthik on the show?
Yep, I am indeed. Karthik is along for the ride. What have you been up to?
Oh man, just we've been doing a lot of programming. We're trying to get a lot of pre-records out as much as possible for the holiday season. When we take a break, and we're also, we're still doing a regular writing on the regular basis as well. So all of that is happening as we try to get it together. And what's going on in the political scene?
I think this is something that I've been talking about for a while. Is like the Democrats have set themselves up for catastrophe, because this the child tax credit, the last payment is going out on the 15th of December. If they don't have something passed soon, you're going to be getting a beginning of the year where people don't start getting these payments. They start filing their taxes, and they're also not going to get the child tax credit that they're used to. So yeah, I could see that. And then plus, with these the abortion rights going away, yeah, the Democrats have set themselves up for.
Do you think that they'll be able to use the abortion crisis as a galvanizer, as a get out the vote tool?
I think it's already backfiring. I think they're trying that already, and it's already backfiring. You've got some of the biggest cheerleaders from for Biden. Now they are, because that's what the Senate Democrats are like, literally right now sending out emailers saying, hey, if you want us to protect Roe, you got to vote. And people are responding, we already did.
Wow. As in, we voted to get you in office, and that should be enough.
You're here now. The filibuster could, not be there. They could solve any of these problems. And people know that. The game, I think, is, I'm not going to say the game is up for the Democratic Party, but for a lot of their cheerleaders. But, by the time it comes to vote, they might be still doing the, lesser of two evils type of thing.
Well, let's see if we fixed this technical issue.
They might be still doing the, lesser of two evils type of thing.
You still have a window open.
No, I have an echo.
Let's see if we fix this technical issue. All right,
Can
Mark.
you hear me?
They might be still doing the,
let me.
We're having some technical difficulty issues. Marcus.
Yeah, I don't know. This is good now.
The deep state doesn't want us to have this conversation. That's what it is.
Or
Exactly.
it actually just might be Kuba jealous that he's not here right now, and so he's messing with it.
So listen, what exactly is going to be the nature of this sports show that you guys are working on?
I think from Mac's perspective is more of just like, I think, some of the day-to-day stuff. But I'm hoping to be able to dive, I don't know, into some of the deeper issues in sports. And I think one of the more recent ones is college players being able to own their rights. And seeing how that kind of plays out for for college students. I think in a few years you might be seeing like states adjusting their like tax brackets or tax they're just their taxes to adhere to college students to get some of those big names. But yeah, I don't know. And also, I mean, Jason's kind of big on like, hey, there's a lot of people that pay attention to sports. Why shouldn't we talk about it? Which makes sense.
Okay, we're gonna try one more time.
Sorry.
I'm going to walk to wherever it is you are in Europe, and I'm gonna fix it myself.
Is it better now?
Now it sounds like Snap, Crackle, and Pop from the Rice Krispies are in your computer. So somehow you've got 3 little minions in your computer. Don't worry about it. We're just going to deal with it. It's just going to be your effect. Don't. Just leave it.
So you see, I'm hearing you very clearly now.
I don't know what you did, but you have a demon in your microphone.
We're having some feedback.
And I don't know how you got a demon in your microphone.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm destroying your...
This is a common thing. Hold on. Keep talking, guys.
All right.
This is the most aggressive deep state action I think that we've had on the show before.
Absolutely, man. This has got to be some kind of like international consortium of intelligence officers coming together to be like, no, we cannot have the European woman talking about our race and transcending it on the Revolution podcast.
I think that's something that is very dangerous, right? A black woman trying to criticize the state of identity politics. What's Kamala gonna do once we get the show started?
Clutch the pearls.
Yeah.
And the ducks.
Okay, we're here. Christine, can you hear us?
I can hear you now.
Good.
But
You're demon free. You're fine now. The demon's gone. The bad man's gone. We did an exorcism on your computer. And the bad man is gone. What happened was, what we do usually, Christine, just to let you know, we try to have one white person on the show so these problems don't happen. If you have one white person on your show,
oh, good.
Then you can keep yourself free of these technical problems. We tried to be smart today, and we were like, we're going to be black. And then you get infiltrated by the deep state, and then you get possessed by...
But I have my husband. He can be the white person to help.
Is he a white person?
Yeah, I have a white husband. I'm one of those bad women.
Well, yeah, how white is he?
No, don't judge anything. Don't judge anything.
No, he can't be shown on the screen. He's in this. Tell him he goes up on the screen.
Okay.
Tell him I'm just joking. I'm not serious. He could definitely. Okay, he knows I'm joking. That's good that he knows I'm joking.
Yes.
It is totally fine. You and your white husband. All right, I'm going to stop. Thank you guys for your patience. So
Sorry.
Oh shit! Bring him back because your shit is acting up again. Bring his white ass back.
Oh no.
Yeah, you need the white man sitting next to you at all times.
Seriously?
Yeah,
I think
that's what the rule book says.
Andreas? Seriously?
Yeah, I'm
We're
serious.
having the feedback again.
Oh, but
Yeah, you
I
gotta bring
don't
him
catch
back.
anything.
Yeah, hold on. I'm gonna read this while you fix your problem. I'm assuming that the internet sucks in Germany now.
I thought the Germans had this super, super dope technology on fleek all the time.
Apparently not.
So,
Apparently not. But that does prove our point that you have to have at least one white person next to you at all times when doing this. Just one.
yeah. I feel like as soon as he left the room, it was
Yeah, as soon as he left the room, her shit got fucked up.
Yeah.
Horrible.
He was like off to make a casserole or something.
A mayonnaise pie. Just playing Jimmy Buffett really loud for no reason. Fucking making a mayonnaise pie, rocking a Tommy Bahama shirt, just doing white people shit for no reason.
Oh shit!
Got black socks and flip flops on, yelling at beige kids. So
Yeah.
I do want to start off by reading this article that was a front page article in the LA Times. And it's titled, Race, Free Speech Takes Center Stage. A theater professor's remarks spark backlash, then boycott. It all started with a misunderstanding. A Black theater student at Coastal Carolina University told a visiting drama teacher she wanted to connect with non-white students, so the teacher drew up a list of names on a whiteboard, then forgot to erase it when they left the studio. When several other students walked in, they saw the list and were left with the suspicion that those on it had been singled out with racist intent. A committee of professors investigated and promptly sent out a department-wide email clarifying what had happened that September day. Seeking to calm students, the professors wrote that the explanation in no way undermines the feelings that any of you feel about the incident, and that the faculty was deeply sorry. The visiting teacher also wrote an apology. No matter the good intention, I still want you to know I'm an idiot and I am sorry. Things might have ended there, but at a time when college campuses have become center stage for the polarizing issues of race, identity, and what constitutes harm, the theater department was primed for conflict. Enter Steve Ernest. Quote, sorry, but I don't think it's a big deal, the 62-year-old drama professor, who is white, wrote in a reply all email. I'm just sad people get their feelings hurt so easily. And they're going into theater? That right there, I literally dropped my iPad and couldn't stop laughing that he literally said, look, you're a fucking theater nerd. You better toughen up, Buttercup.
No.
This
Yes.
is bad.
Notable badasses, theater kids.
So you heard me read that, right, Christine?
Yes, I heard you while I was trying to. Can you hear me like better?
We can hear you. There's a little bit of it. We're just going to deal with it. We're going to work through the pain right now. Much like these theater students working through the pain of names on a board.
Nice.
We're going to work through the pain of the feedback. So it doesn't stop there. Within minutes, his iPad lighted up with messages mostly from Black theater majors. Thinking like that is part of the problem, wrote Khalees Harriet, a 21-year-old senior. This department is a joke. Grow up, full offense, wrote senior Jihad Livermore, 23, addressing Ernest, adding that instead of inquiring privately and trying to learn, you decided to chalk it up to sensitivity. The professor replied that night, thanks for all your hate mails, he wrote, adding, deleting this chain. First of all, right there, I'm just going to stop it right there. What do you guys think of this situation?
I don't even understand it. The Black kid asked to have someone connect him with other students in the class, and they put him or her name on the board. Because their name was kept on the board, they felt that they were being racially singled out.
a visiting professor came and wanted to connect with non-white students, and that visiting professor asked for the non-white students, and the person wrote their names on a whiteboard, and they just left and didn't erase it. So he got the list of non-white students, or she got the list of non-white students, and then they just left names on a board. So when the kids came into class, they see the names on the board, and they automatically just assumed it was something racist because it was all the non-white students. So it.
Yeah.
So
basically, they believe that they were being targeted.
Yeah,
because their names were on the board.
It's just names on a board. They don't know what it is.
But didn't she explain that she was just trying to reach out to the non-white students?
Yeah.
But that alone was considered to be some kind of racial microaggression?
Offensive and racial harm.
That was racial, having their names because they were non-white, let's say they were black or brown or whatever, put on a board.
Yes.
A chalkboard.
Yes.
And being left there overnight.
Yes.
Was racially offensive.
It was racially offensive.
Why? Because the ink was in black and the writing was white.
there was more white on that whiteboard than black. Therefore, it is racist.
And mind you, this is the front page of the LA Times. I just wanted to see
on the front page of the LA Times.
The front page of the LA Times, because it gets worse. It gets worse. I kind of want to skip through. So just to let you know, the teacher in question. So one part you also have to keep in mind is that they wrote a department-wide "I'm sorry" email to the students and everybody in the department, and a professor in the department, a drama professor in the department, replies basically, "You guys are all snowflakes. Get over it. Not a big deal." And the black students get mad and they boycott and they protest.
Protest, like as in like signs protest? Like
yes.
So
and
what
are
are
they
they protesting?
You want to know what the sign said?
Yes.
Is everybody ready?
Yeah.
Christine, are you ready? Chad, are you ready? Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, say it.
Black actors matter.
All right. Okay.
Sorry.
Black actors matter.
Black actors matter.
Yo, that's really. How old are these kids?
There's some times where I like people make me think that Havana syndrome is more real than racism.
How old were the kids?
These are college-age students in their 20s.
Wow, man.
Black actors matter.
Wow, man. Makes me feel like I was overly sensitive in high school when Joyce Carducci was calling me a Moulignan, man. Jeez.
So imagine Pascal's going to school and the principal was like, hey, there's that Moulin kid. He kind of smart over there. Hey, Moulin.
Wow.
I read that and I almost shit because I was laughing so hard, and it actually got worse. Now, keep in mind, all night I'm reading Christine's book about race and anti-racism, and I'm coming up with questions for the show and talking points for the show, and I fucking open the paper just to see what the headlines are. I just sometimes just get it for the headlines. And then, bam, I read this thing and I'm trying to, that's why I was a little late actually coming on the street, because I'm reading this and I'm like, this can't be real. And that's when I was like, I hit you guys up and I was like, I'm going to open this up. I had a whole opening where I'm reading part of Christine's book. And I highlighted all these fucking parts of her book that I wanted to read and address. And then I was like, no, fuck that, because this is pretty much her book in a nutshell. And we're going to use what she's talking about in her book in real time to examine this. Now, before I unmute you, Christine, we have to make sure that the demons are gone out of your computer. because when I turned you on again, it was demonified. So make sure the demons are gone.
You know what? I'm going to close this single thing. I can't close my.
Oh, now I want to add a special caveat to this. The teacher that sent the reply all email out about the sensitivity of the students is a 65-year-old white man and Trump supporter. Also, to complicate matters even more, because you just can't be a Trump supporter and a drama teacher, he's a huge fan of European avant-garde cinema. His favorite movie, or one of his movies that he likes, depicts a scene where a father is placing his penis on a table while his daughter swings a hammer over it. So he's into that whole thing. Fucks up your whole notion of what you think about a Trump supporter.
So, of course, all of this comes out as a result of this particular fracas about the kids.
Because the names on the board, literally just names on the board.
Wow.
That Monday morning, dozens of students dressed in black skipped classes. Messages were pinned on doors and notice boards across humanities and arts building. Fire the racist. Time to resign. And Black actors matter.
Wow.
Christine, your book tackles this sort of anti-racism. What would you say to these very angry students? We can hear you now.
Oh, sorry, because it's written the host muted you. Sorry, really not. I'm not sure if I want to say out loud what I want to say to them. And what can I say? I will say, well, yes. No, let's be serious. I mean, I will say, well, there is it's really hard to be well. Okay, I would say, well, you know, there is problems of racism, but really, that's not it. That's not
not a racism.
Really, no, that's just a group of young people who are oversensitive about something without knowing. Actually, I mean, they became, when you think about it, they became upset without knowing why they had their name on the board. So you made an assumption that just because you are who you are, that means that somebody has to attack you. So the assumption is that basically because of their non-white status, it means that it has to be for a bad reason. And then the fact that the professor was attacked just because he complained about I think it's what you said. Yes, he complained about the finger. I think this is a trivialize important problems of racism for no reason. It's just bad. It's just.
Well, let me ask you this, and I want to ask you this, and this goes out to the whole panel, and I want to get the chat's perspective on this as well. As I was reading this story, I called up Jean Bajlan and I hit up Pascal as well, but he was looking at a whole nother racial grievance porn that's going on right now as we speak on the internet, right? What was kind of interesting at the end of the article, one of the students says, "I am a consumer and I don't want to be offended at the place I spend my money." And that reduces the university to a business, and now the administrators and teachers are now customer service agents. And this is a quote from the article. So how do you guys feel about that?
Which I don't know. I've got an echo now.
Go ahead. It's gone.
I think this is just kind of like an overlapping of a few different issues, because like that's that might be the most problematic thing said out of this whole scenario, was the understanding of education as a consumer item, which and like Christine said, this is not an issue of racism, like that, definitely not a thing. Yeah, that's more concerning to me than anything else, well, I guess like just the whole situation is concerning, right? Like there's just this huge backlash or assumption that turned into this fake racial grievance. And even the protest, I mean, that seems like a more of a blackface, than than anything that I've seen in my lifetime. It's like this fake facade of an actual like real movement and real politics. But no, it's very sad.
What do you say, Pascal?
I mean, I think that what this demonstrates to me is the way in which, the politics and the discourse around race have been trivialized in a way that it's reduced to personal discomfort as opposed to exploitation and oppression or extraction to the level where anything that makes you uncomfortable can be channeled in a way that's deemed as quote unquote racial or racial insensitivity. Now, I don't think that we should undermine the reality that there are things that, racism exists. There are racist things that do exist as well. But to me, the larger problem we have is that I think there's a discourse that is largely elite driven coming out of universities, academia, liberal media, the liberal chattering class, that is racializing phenomenon that disproportionately are really affecting people who are poor and Black, whether it be police encounters, whether it be homicide by cop, whether it be, interactions with, racist individuals. This does not say that Black people who are upper middle class or wealthy don't experience racism, but the way in which Black people who are poor or working class deal with racial hostility largely has to do with their economic precarity as well as their race. Not trying to separate the race from it, but a large part of it has to do with their economic precarity. But the problem I have with the way this discourse is being framed is that it's a discourse that's being framed by largely elites, Black elites particularly, who are using this particular moment, particularly with the rise of the reactionary right, the Trump phenomenon, and so on and so forth, and the post-Obama moment, to focus on racial hostility divorced from the actual material condition of the people who suffered from it in the worst way, which are poor and working class Black people, and turn this into a phenomenon where when we do try to remedy these problems, we get things like JP Morgan wanting to dedicate $10 million to Black female business startups. Or $10 billion.
$10 billion, yeah.
$10 billion.
Well, Christine, as you could imagine, working in the university system, the first thing that happened was once the students were upset, they brought in the troops, aka diversity and inclusion. Can you explain to the crowd what diversity and inclusion is and what it does in this anti-racist framework that you critique so well in your book?
More started the critique because the books is a bit more than just targeting one area. But this diversity and inclusion, I think for me, it's part of the racial thinking. Basically, for me, it's the reaction of the students is not unusual because at the moment, what Pascal was arguing, racism is being seen only as an individual and a personal problem. So racism is being changed to individual problems, individual behavior, or individual attitudes, or belief, or education, or lack of education, or ignorance. So then when you have the racism being seen like that, then the individuals who are seen as a part of the racial groups or discriminated against can look at anything that's been done to them as racism, basically individuals attacking them. So racial identity becomes quite very important. And the problems with the diversity and representation is part of that, basically, is first of all, based on the idea that racism is an individual problem and that groups of people have to be together and represent each other. So if you have if you're black, you're supposed to be representing other black people. If you're white, you're representing white people, or different groups of people. So it's, for me, all the discussions is still based on the idea that somehow race is important, racial identity is important, and we want to have, if we have equalities, we have to have a diverse groups of people representing the people who look the same as them, because it's very much about look, and race is very much about look or culture. So it's really all the discussion. What I was trying to do in the book is to go away from all the minutiae of the discussion to show how to try to argue that the basis of all the discussion is the way we look at each other, or the way that we understand the world today, and we understand it through the issue of race. Whether people are looking at the issue of race as it's a biological category or social construct, we're still looking at each other through the issue of race. And everything that we are arguing today, it's always through that issue of race. I don't know if I'm very clear on the thing is, I go away from the silliness of the discussion, because I think the American discussions on race is absolutely, can be silly, and it's horrible, and it's going nowhere. It's just a fight between different groups of people. I try to go away and show that, and actually we don't even oppose the underlying issue that's creating the issue of race, because the racism has been discussed as only an individual problems, and then you end up having individuals fighting against individuals, and never challenge the whole notion of racism as a social problem. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say. Or can you hear me?
I think that one of the things that you're saying, and I agree with you, is that when you look at some of the recent literature, I don't want to say scholarship, that's being written by proponents of this particular, I call it liberal anti-racism, because part of the problem I have with the way of framing anti-racism as a bad thing is because I think that we're actually giving away a concept that traditionally has been a long part of a struggle for people in American society to challenge, actually fighting racism. And when we frame it, anti-racism, as some kind of problematic concept, I feel that it actually kind of surrenders too much to those forces. And now, but the point I'm trying to say is I definitely agree with the way in which anti-racism has manifested in the contemporary moment is profoundly problematic. What I find troubling is that the potential to conflate a legitimate fight against manifestations of racism with the current problematic way in which liberal anti-racism is being leveled. So that's why I'm somewhat hesitant to frame the concept simply in that broad term of just saying anti-racism. And I tend to kind of root it in liberal anti-racism. I would actually argue that a more effective way would be neoliberal anti-racism, because I think that the way in which this type of anti-racism is dispatched is premised on a type of diversity, equity, and inclusion that prefers individuals that are in more elite, universally pedigreed positions, to the detriment of large numbers of brown, black, and even white people who are not at all getting any type of resources redistributed to them during this type of discourse. One of the things that's fascinating is, if you actually consider, is that in terms of actual positions of power in American society over the last 50 years, whether it be in governance, political positions, in corporate boards, even though there has not been massive overflowing opening, there has been a diversification of positions compared to what we had 50, 60 years ago. So yes, you're going to see more Black people in the newsroom. You're going to see more Black people who are leading men in Hollywood. You're going to see sprinklings of Black people in corporate boards, very small sprinklings, but you're going to see Black people working in financial services sectors, university professors, so on and so forth. But at the same time, the overall inequality and economic inequality and even racial disparity inequality is precipitating. It's growing more and more. So we are having a diversification at the top, but we're having no economic inclusion at the bottom. So what ends up happening is that all of this discourse about race, diversity, inclusion, anti-racism really becomes an elite project in which you are facilitating the rise of a multiracial cadre of elites at a top surrounding a pie that is shrinking, while everyone else that is not in that cadre is not even getting a piece of the crust of that pie. So that's what is most problematic for me about the way in which this contemporary anti-racism discourse is being projected, is that I fundamentally see it as an elite project that is fostering support by working class and poor Black people who do suffer from racism in material ways. I'm not saying that educated Black people don't suffer racism. What I'm saying is that the material consequences of mass incarceration, of police brutality, of gun violence, of drugs, of narcotics, of getting turned down for a job is going to have a different consequence for a poor and working class person than it has for someone who has 3 degrees from Harvard, who can reshuffle their resume and say, well, I didn't get a job at Skadden Arps. Let me go try XYZ law firm.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Christine. You want to say something, Christine?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in that sense, because I remember that when I was before I wrote the book, and I was started to be involved with this anti-racism in trying to listen to what's happening in America, and there was people arguing, we need to have this Black capitalism and these Black entrepreneurs, and I was saying, well, how does a Black person having a Black boss have a better life? I mean, if you're still being paid, I don't know, €2 an hour, you're still being exploited by your boss without, whether it's a Black person or a white person.
But he's Black and he understands your pain. So as he's exploiting you, he's doing it with
He doesn't understand your pain because he still pay you $2 an hour. I'm sorry to say. Whether I had a Black boss or a white boss, he was still my boss and he was still paying me less. So, for me, it's the anti-racism today. It's elite. It's an elite. It's also I suppose it's a problem with the class. Mm-hmm. But I think my problem is also that it doesn't challenge. It's it's based on what is race today, racism about. Because what they are saying is that racism today is basically promoting the same things that racists promoted. They are saying that whether you're black or white is what matters, but we want to have more black on the top. So as if a white working class or a white homeless person is more important than a black entrepreneurs because one is black, the other one is white. So basically, they are still using the same category, race or identities, and they're using it for their own purpose to promote the fact that we have to have more black on top. Like you're saying, you will have more black on top, but the people at the bottom will still be the same. You will have white and black and Asians, all kind of people at the bottom that will still be suffering. But somehow we're supposed to be feeling better because there will be a black president or a black prime minister, or and when you listen to those kind of politics, you can see that this is really a class politics in that sense. Is that it is anti-racism for the middle class and the upper class to basically get more power for themselves, and forget about everybody else. But you can also go further and saying that they are using the same arguments that the racists used to argue, and the same anti-racism today, racism is anti-human. It's the same. They're dividing humanity in the same way with race, and saying that somehow our racial identities can determine and explain ourselves. You were asking me about this diversity and representation. This is what they are saying. They are saying that somehow, just because somebody has the same race as me, a black person, they have my interest. They have the same interest as me. Why? What if somebody is the prime minister in America or in non-America, in the UK, for example? Why, just because we have the same color or the same race, we have the same interest? It's basically saying that somehow my racial identity determines me and determines somebody else. It's really, for me, it's really anti-human, but also anti-political.
Christine and Pascal and Marcus, do you think capitalism drives racism or racism drives capitalism?
I don't think I think it's a matter of driving or not driving. I believe that it's a utility. I believe that racism has a certain utility in capitalism. And one of the main utilities of racism is that when you have a country like the United States, or even in France, for example, let's take in France, 10% of the population of France is Muslim, but Muslims make up 60% of the prison population in France. In the United States, black people make up 13% of the population. In some places, they make 45% of the prison population. So what I'm saying is that race becomes a proxy for poverty in these large capitalist countries, in which what ends up happening is that the problems of the economy or the capitalist system becomes projected as only problems that black and brown people face.
Well, what do you guys say? I'm sorry, but what do you say though? And this becomes the big pushback, right? That we always hear. We get called class reductionists because race is a problem. And as Christine is joking as she's drinking her coffee, I guess she's been called one as well. And they always say, if you point out any sort of disparities between black people on top financially, the next thing the race first person says is, well, those rich black people aren't as rich as their white counterparts. Ergo, racism is real.
Let me ask you a question. If the top 10% of black people own 75% of black wealth, the top 10% of white people own 75% of white wealth, does that make the top 10% of black people any more generous just because black people generally have less wealth? That means that 75% of the wealth is still going to 10% of folks who are, and I would argue that it's even worse because they're telling you that you should be proud of the fact that I own 75% of your wealth because I'm giving you a model to help you uplift yourself by being a person that maintains 75% of that wealth. So the thing that's ironic to me, to those that say, was like, well, because the black uh, elite doesn't have the same amount of wealth as white people, that somehow that doesn't make their politics as problematic. When E. Franklin Frazier wrote Black Bourgeoisie in 1957, the black elite had less wealth. And the phenomenon he was talking about demonstrated why they were not only as problematic, but even more problematic. When Harold Cruz wrote The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual in 1967, and he literally said that, all bourgeoisies sell out, but no bourgeoisie sells out for a lower amount of money than the American black bourgeoisie. That was in 1967. So the point I'm trying to make is that the fact that they have less wealth than the white elite does not necessarily in any way diminish the fact that their position in society as not only racial ventriloquists, but as social control agents of the black poor and working class makes them problematic in terms of how they deal with the majority of black people who are not at the top of that 10% receiving 75% of black wealth. And I would also argue that if that is the problem, what if the remedy for the racial wealth gap in the eyes of the ruling class is like, well, since 80%, and this is a fact, 80% of the racial wealth gap is between the top 10% of blacks and the top 10% of whites, well, why don't we just increase the racial wealth of the top 10% of blacks, make it parity to the top 10% of whites, and that's fine. I mean, literally, and I posted this on social media, there is an event coming up this week at Harvard Business School that is arguing more black people as board members of the Federal Reserve Bank as a means of closing the racial wealth gap. That's the title of the function. In other words, they're arguing that one of the best ways to close the racial wealth gap is to get more black people to be on the board of the Federal Reserve. So what black people exactly is that going to help? Now, if you agree that the racial wealth gap is the problem, well, if the 80% of the racial wealth gap is between those two categories of elites, then obviously the top 10% of black people are doing exactly what they need to do to improve the racial wealth gap. Because all of the programs that have been coming out of this racial disparities discourse are forms of some type of economic empowerment for the black 1%.
And I think going back to the original, question of, is it capitalism that, creates racism? I think that's something that Christine actually spells out, or it lays out pretty well in the book, is that there are, this is like an evolution of ideas, that kind of been fought out through society. And as you see the creation of capitalism, or at least its beginnings to take over from feudalism. There's also these discussions as far as what is race, or what is it to be human. But and at the end of the day, powerful people end up utilizing these things in order to subjugate others.
Yeah.
And so that's where we're getting to the point where, at the end of the day, we're existing under capitalism, and races.
There becomes this argument where, and I want to hear what Christine has to say once we stop with her echo that we're getting from her. There becomes an issue where, when you, like Christine had said earlier, she goes, well, if I have a black boss that's exploiting me, he's still exploiting me. Then the next thing someone will say is, but that black boss takes their orders from a white person. I'm like, does that mean that if there was no white person there, then the black boss wouldn't be a boss anymore, and he'd just be, you'd have a co-op? Like,
I mean, at the end of the day,
what is the role? What is then the role of the? It's almost like there's this Afro-pessimistic framework in which everybody thinks in.
Well, and another thing, Christine spells out is that it's like you fall into the same framework that racists believe, that because you are black, you are going to end up treating other black people in a certain way.
And you
And-
have no agency also. That's also
Yeah.
saying like there's no agency that you have whatsoever as a quote unquote black boss, which I definitely don't like that.
Black gravity.
Christine?
There's a race. This is what you want.
Hold on, Christine. It's so bad right now. I don't know what is wrong with you. Can you guys talk for a second while I walk through her? We're going to do some troubleshooting.
Okay, yeah, we definitely having some sound, but no, but yeah, when I saw that Harvard Business School advertisement, close the racial wealth gap by having more black people sit on the board of the Federal Reserve Bank. I was like, if this is not a class project, I don't know what is, man.
And that's I mean, I think that goes 100% overlaps in like the issues between, you know, that Christine raises in the book, between the article that Jason was reading, you know, and that's like the neoliberalism of, you know, race discourse, to where if you literally just start going down to, hey, just a few individual people in the right place will mean something for millions of people existing within a country. And it I mean, it's absurd. It's just ridiculous. I mean, but the thing is that's sad is that so many people are buying into it. And I don't know what you get at it. What is the benefit, you know? Like, just you get like 10 minutes of I get to, you know, call someone a racist or exert some type of power, getting someone fired. But then you go off still on guard that like maybe it's the barista or, you know, whoever, and, you know, like is white in society is just like one moment away from doing a horrible, violent racism to me.
No, I mean, the thing is, though, the larger point that I'm trying to say here is that, okay, if we understand that, you know, that capitalism creates a certain paradigm in which race, particularly black people, are otherized largely because of poverty and suffer the vicissitudes and harms of capitalism and racism in a worse way. The question becomes, how do you create an economic and political situation in which those harms and damages can be ameliorated or abolished whatsoever? Yes. Now, the question becomes, simply because, does that mean it's simply because you move to a socialist society that racism ends? I'm not making that argument at all, because I don't believe that will happen. Because my position is this: whether or not a white person is racist or not is not my initial motivation in trying to be concerned about. What my motivation is to neutralize the ability of his racism or collective racism to affect my material quality of life, sense of self-value, ability to earn and live productively in society. So the reason why I would argue in terms of actual socialism mitigating not so much the existence of racism, but mitigating the capacity of that racism actually affecting your life, is that if the means of production and ownership of those things that create the ideological superstructure, i.e. media, i.e. corporation, i.e. jobs, labor, are democratized in a way where black and brown people have not only ownership of those means of productions, but a say in which they are structured, in the way in which they are actually directed, in the way, the image that are projected from them, the way in which resources are actually distributed, then that would go a long way to diminish the actual way and the capacity of those economic paradigms to reproduce the racial harm that requires that black people suffer those consequences. But the question then becomes, even in a society where 65% of the population is white and 14% of the population is black, even if you had ultimate socialism, where you had diversification of ownership of the means of production and all of those things, there would still be racism. I'm not going to deny that. It would definitely ameliorate the economic and material harm. But again, the question becomes for me is the goal to stop individual white people from feeling like they don't like black people? I'm not saying we should not fight for that as well. But for me, the ultimate utility of challenging capitalism
in front of you
is that I want to stop the necessity of having an economic model that requires large segments of black people being on the bottom.
Well, yes, too, is like I feel like the question then becomes, how do you get people to understand that that these little individual self-satisfying moments of wielding power through identity just not only isn't worth it, but I think is Christine argues, actual detriment to having a world where either A, racism doesn't hold power, or B, it does not exist.
Let's define racism as Christine does in her book with Ibrahim X. Kendi's definition of racism. I'll read this passage right here. According to American historian Ibrahim X. Kendi, a racist idea is any concept that regards one racial group as inferior or superior to another racial group in any way. Two important notions are in this definition: the notion of hierarchy and the notion of race. One cannot talk about a, quote, racist idea if there is not already a notion of a, quote, racial group or race, unless one is reading history backward and applying modern concepts to past understanding and beliefs. That was Christine's answer to Ibrahim X. Kendi's definition of racism, which I think becomes kind of part of the problem, especially in this anti-racism discourse. Can you hear me now, Christine?
Yeah, I can hear you, but can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
It's better?
Yes, don't do anything. Just stay still. Don't move. Don't move. Hold in a fight. Don't move.
Well, you see, I've got the things now.
Works perfect.
So tell us about when you first read Ibrahim X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, and you looked at his anti-racism, and you say it's ahistorical. Why do you say it's ahistorical?
But, it's not the only one. The way that people are looking at race, basically they're looking at race as if it was something that is continuous. It's always been like that. So you have different race, and then people look at superior and inferiority, and this is how they look, and they're arguing that racism is something that is been happening for as long as there was black and white people, there was always racism kind of thing. So it's becoming very ahistorical because, first of all, they don't look at the developments of the notion of race. And in the quote that you were saying is that also the hierarchy, as if the argument is if there is no hierarchy, then there will be no racism. But the issue that I was discussing also later in the book is that when you talk about race equality, you also using the notion of race, which is always the problems of the underlying basis of racism. I am part of the school who believe that unless you challenge and oppose the notion of race, racism will still be a problem. It doesn't have to be black and white. I can imagine that, for example, in America, you will have no problem between black and white people, but you could have, for example, the Muslims or the Jews or other groups of people going to be defined and rationalized and being put at the bottom of the society. So it's the notion and that is in problems. And Kendi and others basically trying to look at what we have today and then go back to the past in human history and trying to argue that as if all the differences that people had in the past was the same as what we have today. In the book, I was talking about the Greek, for example, and I'm saying that the problems of today and in the past, human diversity is a fact of life. We have all kind of people, and I'm talking about the look and the biology. We all kind of people, But human diversity doesn't mean we have to be divided into race.
Mhm.
In America, race and racial identity is really important. It seems that before I started to look at the things with America, I thought that the issue of nobody will believe that race was so important. Like, it's not the biological category, it's not the science category. We already discussed that. That's been discredited, is past notion. When you look at the discussion in America, a lot of people still believe in the issue of race. Either it's a notion of race. Either they believe it's a biological category, or it's based on ancestry, it's based on history, or it's based on social construct. That's what some people also are arguing. But the notion of race, the idea that we can divide people into different races and we can understand the world through races, is really strong. And until we challenge that, we will have notions of, we have racism, whether it's with black or white or Asian or Muslims or another category, because it's still based on an anti-human way of looking at the world, an anti-political notion. So the problems that we have today are historical in a sense, is that they are going to go and look at the world today and then saying, oh, people didn't like each other in the past, and they have different groups of people, so they must be racist in the past. So completely misunderstanding of what history is about and what is the importance of race today compared to the lack of notion of race in the past. I don't know if you. I'm not very good when I talk with this. Actually, with this.
You sound great. Don't move. I was very serious about your stillness.
Oh, sorry.
No. You could like right there where you are. Don't move. You're good, Pascal.
I think that's very important, and I think that one of the things you're saying, and we had a show one time where we discussed this, how the nature of racial conflict in the United States and the tangible reality of it oftentimes causes people in the United States to project their view of racism as being something like physics or earth science throughout history and time, without understanding the actual context. And you're saying something that I agree with and I've heard, is that just because the Corsicans may have had a problem with the Angles in Europe didn't mean that the Corsicans looked at the Angles as two different races. They may have looked at each other as two different ethnicities or two different nations or two different tribes. When the Wolof may have had a problem with the Pule or the Hausa, they didn't look at each other as two different races. They may have looked at themselves as two different nations or two different people. What people fail to realize is that when you say someone is a different race, you're saying that person is a different species than you are. Different races assume a level of speciation. And to believe that there are different races literally assumes that you're believing that certain other quote-unquote races are different species than your race, which is a fallacy, which we know is a fallacy. So because race has existed in America to almost create a concept where the divisions are ontological, meaning they're almost like physics, like earth science, like rainwater, people have created theories in the United States that literally argue that racial conflict is ontological, that it is like physics, it is like rainwater, it is like earth science. And that belief is fundamentally ahistorical.
I think that's kind of where the danger gets into of buying into the neoliberal anti-racism model, is that there is an agreement on some level with the reactionary right, that there is some type of difference, like Pascal was spelling out, between the races. It's just, what are then the solutions to that? In which case, you'll see liberals say, well, just we need more black people on on the Fed. We need a black president, chucks and pearls, all these things. While the reactionary right will say, no, this means we need to divide our societies on these racial lines, and that way you get some type of harmony. But at the end of the day, those are coming from fundamentally the same argument, that there is some type of difference amongst the races that creates these scenarios and perpetuates racism throughout today.
Right.
I mean, when you look at the evolutions of the notions of race was not about. It didn't start by being about skin color. The notion of race started with the notion that somehow there was different peoples within the same society. So in Europe, the lower class were seen as a different race from the aristocrats, because they were trying to explain. I think this is what we have to understand: is why is it that the notion of race was developed and became such an important way of looking at the world, and why is it that we have to challenge that and oppose it? Race became about skin color when the colonial country went into colonies, and they have to explain the inequality that they had between Europeans and the colonized world. But in the beginning, race was about lower class and aristocrats and upper class. So it was basically, when you look at also this different notion, is you have to look at the social circumstances in which they developed. So when people want to go and look at the race all the way through human history, they're forgetting that the society that we had in different human history was different. Feudalism, ancient Greek did not have the same society that we have today in capitalism. And when we have capitalism and you have also the notions of equality, you have to explain how can we have equality, how can we believe the world about equality and men equal when you have people who are not equal. Because even if people have this belief of equality, capitalism doesn't believe equality in society. There is no social equality in society. So how do we explain why there is poor working class, starving, living in squalid conditions? How do you explain that they are the same people as the aristocrats? So then you can explain it through race, that there are different races, they are determined by their race, they cannot have a better life because this is what their race is about. And then how do you explain why the Africans are so living so differently, why they have a different race also? It's because that's the reason why they can't live the same way as we do, and we have to colonize them because they have different races. So the notion, if we understand why the notion of race becomes developed and so important, we can also challenge it today. And the reason why I'm stressing that is because it is the basis of the issue of racism. But I also don't think that racism exists, but I don't think racism is the most important issue that we have to challenge. And I think the arguments that we look at the black pool being as exploited as the white pool is one argument showing that challenging racism only is not viable. Basically, I'm on my own or what?
No, we're all here. We're all here.
Sorry.
We were just like, fuck this. You thought we just left?
No.
She didn't see it, so she thought because the screen was bigger, so she didn't see us.
No, because I can't stand monologue. So if I only see myself, it's like I'm talking to myself, like, oh God. So for me, it's the important things and when you look at the anti-racism today, hardly anybody wants to challenge this notion. And this is if we are into if we are an individuals who wants to for me the reason why I wrote a book is because I want to have a society where you have a better human development and individual development. It means that you're also supporting the issue of humanism. Basically, you're supporting that human can create and change, create a new world, change themselves and change the world. if you believe in the notion of race, you go against human abilities. You basically saying that humans cannot determine themselves or cannot change themselves because they are divided into those races that tell you how they're going to behave, what they're going to think, what they're going to be doing. And when you look at the representation, that's what it does. It's saying that because we're one race, black, we are all supposedly going to represent each other. So we can, a black man can represent me because he's just being black. So basically, you're taking my agency away. You're saying that as an individual or as a human, I cannot determine or I cannot change myself and change the world. The notion of race is really a barrier to changing. If we want to change something about our destiny, that is really anti-human and anti-politics. That's what I wanted to stress.
Let me read this from your book as well. Many of those who argue that racial thinking and racism have always existed do not understand the, quote, dynamic character of social development. In order for us to comprehend the present and find solutions for the future, but try to use their interpretation of the past in order to artificially create an identity such as the, quote, black identity for their own recent purpose. Racism is the political and social expression of the idea of racial thinking, whereby races are described as inferior or superior. Ideas are put into practice to organize society. The idea of race and notion of hierarchy in races should be strongly opposed, but not by simply challenging the notion of, quote, hierarchy itself. Making a judgment that a group is superior or inferior over another group using specific criteria is not wrong in itself. We do appreciate and discuss whether a specific sports team is technically superior to another. The notion of racial hierarchy is a problem because it is based on a social order described as racial order to make it natural, permanent, but more importantly, legitimate. Using biology and science, social inequality became racial inequality in the 19th century. First, when describing social groups such as the lower and upper classes within European societies, and then when discussing differences between European societies, their colonies, and the rest of the world. Pascal, what say you?
No, I mean, I think it's a very, very effective and very, very true reality is that the problem with race is not only that it creates a paradigm of racial hierarchy. The problem with race is in believing that there are different races of human beings in the first place, because that goes to the point I was making earlier, is that basically what you're saying is that there are human beings that are different species than other human beings just because they have darker or lighter skin, which is problematic, which is ridiculous. But where this becomes complicated, and you talk about this in your book, is how in certain periods of time, for example, you mentioned in your book about how in the late 19th century, scientific racism was used as a means to explain race, biological differences, phrenology, cranium sizes, and that goes into eugenics and so on and so forth. But there was a particular move, particularly in the early 20th century, late 19th century, with the rise of sociology and social work as a discipline, which shifting the quote unquote inferiority of people away from scientific racism and using quote unquote culture. That culture is the thing that makes XYZ group or people inferior. And what that really did was that culture really just became a proxy for race or racism. And what is fascinating is that, number one, most people know that was actually a move that starts in academia that also informs much of ethnic pluralist thinking and frameworks that are still popular throughout American political history. Excuse me. And second of all, how they were used to inform policy even up until the 80s and 90s with concept like underclass ideology. Underclass ideology, for those who do not know, was a culture of poverty argument. It made the argument that the reason why Black people were not able to be competitive in America is because they had a quote unquote defective culture. And what is so ironic about that is that it creates this kind of ridiculous tautology, is that Black people are defective because their culture is bad. Black culture is bad because Black people are defective. So it becomes this kind of ridiculous, vicious cycle. And one of the main reasons why there was a shift from scientific racism to culture is that it became a more effective means of denying the reality that poverty in an American capitalist society is necessary. All right, because capitalism requires that wealth distribution is unequalized. And in order to justify racialization of poverty, to again make it seem like these people are culturally defective and they're the only ones who don't succeed, it becomes necessary to reify this culture of poverty argument without acknowledging it's like maybe these people are poor because up until the 60s, you relegated almost 70% of their labor to being sharecroppers and domestic workers. Maybe the reason you have this racial wealth gap is until 1965, most of them were still working on plantations or as maids and butlers. Or maybe the fact that they were entering into capitalism in the 70s at a time in which massive deindustrialization was coming into play, which also led to social dislocation, family fracture, alcohol and drug abuse. The quote unquote things that you're calling cultural are a product of policy and economic choices that did not lead for the reification of what is considered socially normative family life. But again, because we reduce these arguments to, okay, first we can't use race, let's use culture. We don't consider, for example, when you hear people say things like, oh, look at the Asians, they come here in America and they do well. No one looks at the fact that in 1965 and 1967, the immigration requirements for Asians coming into the United States made it so that they had to have high skills or levels of education that made them more competitive than even whites in this country. No one was talking about Asians as the model minority in 1865.
Well, they were building the railroad, so.
Yeah, but you can see the problem, because like you're saying about culture and race, and actually ethnicity is also is the same. It's they're using they're doing the same things all the time, and they're trying to explain the inequality that you have by putting the blame onto the groups of people that you are basically rationalize. So whether they use culture or whether they use race or ethnicity, you rationalize the people and then you put them into membership, and then you explain the reason why there is inequality by putting the blame onto them basically. That's one of the problems of race. Race is not, because some people always looking at a race or culture, it's just a grouping of people, but it's not only a grouping of people. It has consequences. And basically you end up putting the blame onto what I mean by a social problem. So you have a underlying mode of productions in capitalism, and you have conflicts. And because we do have two different classes, and you have conflicts, social conflicts within capitalism, and when you have the social conflicts and social problem, you're explaining by dividing and putting the blame into different groups of people. And culture does that. The culture has been replaced by race. When race in France, you're not supposed to even talk about race. Apparently, just by erasing the word West, suddenly everything will go all right. That's how the French establishment have been doing. But you see, it's basically you always are putting the blame onto the people that have to deal with the social problem. That's
absolutely.
So you never challenge. So if you are not racist, or you have to challenge the basis of it. Because if you just go into racist, because in fact what the anti-racist people are doing today, they're making it as a permanent part of human nature. Somehow this is, there was a survey showing that racial identities is important for Black people in America. You can understand why, because at the end of the day, you Black people have been racialized groups of people. If you were Black, or if you're white, but if you're Black, you have there are certain consequences into your life when you're an American, and if you're white, it's different consequences. So the Blacks, for the Blacks to have racial identity being so important, historically that's completely normal. But then if you use racial identities or even other identities as a way of determining the people, then you creating a bias to them, basically saying that their race is more important than anything else.
That's a very you're coming to a really great point, and I really wanted to go there because this is excellent. One of the consequences of the way America is racialized, and I think we will all agree with this, is that for the majority of American history, the image, the sheer image and presence of Black people in public consciousness, whether it was in media, print media, literature, what have you, was degraded or seen as negative or seen as socially inferior, unappealing, derogatory, sometimes bestial. In other words, throughout American history, 18th, 19th, 20th century, there is a particular way in which Blackness and ethnicity is degraded. It's not exclusive to Blackness. This is done with other ethnic groups, but in a more extreme and consistent way, you see it with Black people. For example, in the 20s and 30s, you would see these old images, Step and Fetch It. You have, you have the in the Dixie era, you have the kind of like, blackface imagery, so on and so forth. There's a long history in American discourse, literary, intellectual, and otherwise, of negating the value, minstrel shows, the value of Black people. That I don't think anyone would deny that. In the face of that negation, it is not illogical, in the face of that negation, that Black people would, as a result of trying to push against those negative perceptions, create a sense of pro-Black identification that valorizes their ethnicity as a point of pride and look towards examples of achievement as a point of pride. So what ends up happening is that it causes a conundrum in that you're in a society where, for the supermajority of the history of this country, is rooted in a degradation of all things relative to the Black consciousness and image. And in reaction to that degradation, to maintain a certain level of personal and ideological integrity, that develops a certain type of reification of pride and collective identification with that Black identity. What I find particularly complicated about the current moment we have in racial discourse in America is that there are still large numbers of Black folk in America who, whether we want to say right or wrong, logical, they still cling to that need for racial pride because there are still degrading images in the conscience of the majority of Americans about Black identity. I wrote an article recently talking about how when you turn on media, you see Black people as either $1 million athletes or criminals. Mm-hmm. So understanding that part of the consequence of this racialization of image is a need to perpetuate internal validation and valorization. One of the consequences, though, of that validation and valorization is that it becomes easy prey for elements of the ruling class to play on that need for validation and valorization and manipulate it in a way that leads to the very, very vapid neoliberal identity politics that we see today, where symbols of either leaders or actors or entertainers are foisted on Black people as this is your image of racial pride that you need.
Pascal, I want to push back against you for your comment about Black people only being athletes or criminals, because I watch Tyler Perry movies and they're ad executives.
That's a new phenomenon.
So
Blackish.
there.
So the point I want to make, and this is why I'm glad Christine is here, is that how exactly do we navigate this particular puzzle, this conundrum that we realize is the reality that we're in?
You know, if you read the book, and I wrote a thesis after the book, and I go a bit further than the book is, and I carry on trying to understand. My position is anti-identity politics. The way I see it is that the idea of racial identity is as bad as any other identity. Not identity as a person, like if you want to have your own identity, but identity is being used in politics. This is how I understand. I understand identity politics as when you use social identities like race, nationality, sex, gender, where you live, mother, father, that kind of thing. So social identities being used in the political domain. So basically, you use your identity and you're part of your identity groups, and you ask for a special or special resources or special privilege. That's what identity politics is. And when the anti-racist or other groups of other social movements are using identity politics for their own purpose, they are using the politics that has been done by other people in the past. And so, this kind of politics prevents you. You may have a better life, like you may have more rights. For example, in America, you may have more equality, but you don't go very far with this kind of identity politics, and you basically end up being a competition. So racial identity is the same as any other identity politics. So you have a social identity in politics competing with other identity politics. Should I support the racial identity as Black, or should I support the identity groups as Black women, or should I ask for the identity groups Black women heterosexual, because I'm married with a man? There's you end up having different groups of people dividing into different groups of identity groups, and they're fighting each other, and there is no change. I even mentioned in the book, you have this ADOS group in America, which when I read that, I thought, oh my God.
What was your first?
Sorry.
No. Hold on. We can definitely, just for a quick minute, we have to go down this rabbit hole, Christine.
Oh, this is sad. I was trying to find excuses of how small those and how dividing those identity politics is becoming. And when I read about the adults, I thought, oh my God, oh God, and one day we're going to have all these little minute groups, and we're going to fight against each other. And so for me, I'm against racial identities, not in the sense of you cannot see yourself as Black, white woman, or whatever, but I'm against identities being used in politics to fight for resources, because you don't challenge anything. So racial identities, I also look at racial identities national identities, cultural identities, ethnic identity, sexual identity, gender identities. They're all identities that are used to divide us and then to fight for a little resources depending of which identity groups you support or don't support. This is not politics, and this is also anti-human in that sense, because you have to argue that each of individuals are determined by their identity groups that they support or they agree with, and their interest is depending on their identity groups. So if you're Black, you have interests of Black people. If you're a woman, you have interests of white women. A woman. If you're a lesbian, you are interests of the lesbian. This is anti-politics. This is.
So would you say would you say back to the original story that we were talking about, which again I think kind of encapsulates a lot of what you write about in your book, because also it takes place in academia, right? It takes place in the school system. So oh God, I totally forgot what I was going to say. I'm going to get off the screen. Totally forgot what I was going to say. I fucked around and read the chat. And threw me off.
Well, I mean, the larger point is that I want to address the question that you said, Christine, is that you are opposed to race being the basis of a politics in terms of policy or demands or any of that nature. How then do you address the fact that we may live in an economic situation in which the harms of the economic situation have a disproportionate effect on a combination of race and class of a segment of society? In other words, if we're acknowledging that poor and working class Black people suffer particular disparities or particular natures of problems with things like drug addiction, crime, adverse policing, social dislocation, family fracture, an inability to deal with jobs, I have no problem with a particular class-wide program that addresses the needs of poor and working class people. Does it not mean that we should at least acknowledge the fact that people in certain particular localities, because of the historical way that they have been disadvantaged in this economic model, because of not only their class, but because of their class and race, may require a special dispensation of resources to address the way these problems affect them?
I'm looking at short term and long term. So, for example, if you're in a village and you want to have a train station throwing there, you're going to fight for your train station. This is a short-term politics, and you could say it's identity politics because this is your village identity as your identity as a village, as living in the village, and you're fighting for the resources that you want that train station to go in your village compared to the other village. So when it comes to Black or working class, today it's the way I look at it is that you have identity politics that's been used for a long time, for last centuries. Because for me, identity politics is a politics of the capitalist society. You have identity groups and you're fighting for the resources. So if you're a Black poor and you're fighting for a better life for you, you're fighting for the interest of a Black group, of the Black poor identity group. This is a short term, because all you're doing is that you, as an identity groups, you're challenging another groups for the resources that you want for yourself. I'm not saying that challenging racism and challenging opposing poverty is not important. What I'm saying is that it is all identity politics that is for short term. You're competing with other groups and saying, I want a piece of the pie. You don't change society. And I'm discussing as somebody who thinks that capitalism was better than in the past, but now we can do better than what we have today. So my argument is always based on, I think humanity can do better, can have a society where individuals can develop, humanity can develop, than what we have today. So when we look at identity politics, that it's been happening since, actually, what I'm arguing is that identity politics that we have today, the politics that we have today is all identity politics, and identity politics started with the part of the establishment, the right, what the people will call it right wing or establishments or the elite. You saying that as an aristocrat or as a bourgeois, you're fighting for the interests of the bourgeois. As a worker, you're fighting for the interests of the workers. As a black, you're fighting for the interests of black. And even if the left was talking about working class, when you look at their politics, it was identity politics for a long time. The blacks is the same. Working class, when you look at it, they were fighting for the interests of the working class. They even argue for the working class morality, the working class value, the working class traditions. It's all identities. This is short term. This is groups of people within society fighting for the resources for themselves. That challenged the fact, the underlying fact that we live in a capitalist society where you will have the class, capitalist class, and the working class, and then you will have different groups of people who are having less resources compared to others. You don't challenge that. All you're doing is that you are deciding which social groups you're supporting, and you're supporting them in their competition from other groups. So this is how I look at it: short term, long term. What do I want? I want a society where people can be free, can develop. In the short term, I can challenge and support the black or the working class. But if I support the black or the working class only as the aim of my politics, I'm fighting for short term. I don't change society. I don't make it better. I'm only fighting for the identity groups that I am supporting. Tomorrow I may fight for the woman. So I will fight for the women to have more resources. Then tomorrow I will support the homosexual, and I support the homosexuals for more resources. And we end up having competitions with identity, with other identity. And this is what the politics has been for a few centuries. And this is politics that keeps us in the society that we have today. And I'm talking as a radical. How can we change society? And if we keep the politics that we have today, all we're doing is just challenging each other. Social groups fighting against other social groups, asking for black women, asking for adults, asking for immigrants, Asians, and asking for, what I'm trying to say is that you have the short-term identity politics that can be useful for the short-term getting resources, but it doesn't go further. It is not a politics about how to create a world that will make it better for humanity.
Well, that's what I was trying to say before I accidentally looked over at the chat and they made me laugh and I lost my train of thought. Is that what do these identity politics actually end up doing at the end of the day? Because if you take this story that we started off the show with about this teacher that sends out a very flippant, kind of a silly message that I would just kind of ignore, if anything. Like, what do we get from this anti-racism identity politic? Are we creating weaker people? Because when you look at, again, that situation where the kids are holding up signs like, Black actors matter. What are we really creating, and what is your end goal? No one was ever stopping you from acting. No one was stopping you from doing anything. It was literally a misunderstanding. And then another teacher made just a flippant remark that I would not deem as a racist remark whatsoever. But it's so easy to rake someone over the coals. Is that real cancel culture?
I think you're using an example, and imagine you want to call them snowflakes, as a lot of people are doing
I
it.
don't want to call anybody anything, but
No, I mean, somebody else would. I'm not saying that
Yeah.
you would, yeah. But I think it's a wrong way of looking at it. I mean, we are living in a society where people, if you look at all the groups, all the identity groups, and all the people involved in politics, the idea is that we're living in an atomized world, and that the people away from you, all the people, are people that could be your enemies. So the black actors are doing the same thing as everybody else. If you look at all the politics today, all the different groups work in the same way. They are playing the victims of something. You know, the black actors are victims of racism, and the white working class are victims of the neoliberal progressive. But because we are in a society where we are atomized, and we are also there is no understanding that we could make something together. So everybody else becomes the enemies of what you're fighting for. So if you're part of one groups, you're fighting against everybody else, and they are going to be your enemies. So the idea of the snowflakes and complaining, you found it in every single. I mean, look at the women fighting for the trans. The trans groups, identity groups, and the women's groups are all horrible to each other, and they're all arguing that they are oppressed by each other. I'm talking about the feminists, yes, what they call it, the turf at the moment. So they are also acting as if it was, and for me, it's always the problem of identity politics, in the sense of politics based on identity. You use a social identity and you're arguing your points. And in the 21st century, because of the atomizations of society, you're arguing and the individualism, you're arguing on the level of you as a victim. And if you look at each of the groups, they're always arguing the same way. Whether it's on the top or the bottom, it's always the same. So if you are a left, there is actually, I think the left would be doing as much as the right. If you're arguing them, you're saying, well, I'm supporting the black because of racism. But you're arguing the same kind of politics as somebody who's arguing for the white working class and against the replacement. I mean, all those racist people who are arguing that, the society becomes too brown. They're also arguing about the same thing, that they are victims of something.
Well, what exactly is I mean, we're spending a lot of time talking about, identity politics from the perspective of quote unquote black and brown people. We're in a time right now where the identity politics that's on the ascendancy in America, in the world, is actually white identity politics around the reactionary right. And I understand the dangers of identity politics, but I also realize that there are other constellations of identities that have no problem asserting their politics at this particular moment. Particularly, people within the reactionary right, whether they be, white or evangelical Christian, or whether they be people who believe in protecting the sanctity of the state of Israel, or whether they are people who believe that in, XYZ. I mean, if we're going to criticize the utility of identity politics, I definitely think it should be criticized across the board.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Okay. That's what I'm saying.
In this notion that, the people who get the least out of politics, which tend to be, black constituencies, should be the only type of politics that needs to disappear. I think should be somewhat challenged in that regard, because people are leveraging demands based on a whole variety of identities. And I would argue that I definitely could make a very, very, very sound argument as to why leveraging a race-first identity as a political project has been problematic for black people, because that's what has happened, particularly for the last 60 years. And what has happened is that it's turned black politics into a class politics, in that the beneficiaries of that politics are the class of people who are suffering the least from the current particular economic moment. So I always find it interesting when I hear people of various political persuasions within the black electoral constituency say that, well, class politics can't work for black people. Well, how well has race first politics worked in the last 60 years since the civil rights movement? It's actually demonstrated and watched the greatest loss of black wealth since the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I guess the divorce of at the very least a mass like political education effort just to get these basic understandings, because like I these things seem very obvious, you know, like you'd be like able to like point to the hysterical narratives, but it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't just I guess avoid the fact that like I could right now, you know, like what is that? There's
I'm so sorry, Marcus. Oh, Christine left.
oh, I think she's just checking. I didn't know they still made those.
Was that her phone or yours?
It's mine. I'm so sorry. My husband said that he was going to deal with the phone if he phones. I'm so. Could you hear it?
yeah, it's all good.
The worst is my mother knows it's my mother. Shit. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I've been a disruption for your.
No.
I guess
It's just the audio only podcast episode is going to be hilarious. I'm going to have to give a very detailed intro explaining on everything people are going to hear, because they're going to miss out on all the comedy.
So,
from
I bet-
computer demons. Well, I guess my question for the panel is how do we move from here, right? Because like at the end of the day, I would be personally material better off for my lifetime if I stopped doing This Is Revolution, started JDOS, Jamaican American Descendants of Slaves, and began like galvanizing people on that identity alone, getting some type of monthly service subscription to JDOS, and then somehow we'll get some type of political power and make sure that Jamaican Americans get some type of tax break on the third year.
I want to address something.
Prairie goat for all.
I want to address something that I see being discussed in the chat. Someone putting forth the position that multiracial coalitions don't work because white supremacy will always have the white working class. I want to ask a simple question. When has there been a single advance, no matter how small or big, of black people in America that it was not a product of multiracial working class coalitions, whether it's abolition, the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, or in any way? When has there been a transformation, a major transformation of the condition of black people in America that did not happen because of a multiracial coalition of people working to make that happen? There's not one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even making the assertion that that you can't find solidarity with white people to overcome some of these issues is buying into race as a reality that's just not true.
Well, again, I think reading Christine's book all night, falling asleep reading it. So, Christine, to tell you how fucked up my night was, I'm reading your book, and I took a break from reading it last night and watched old episodes of The Twilight Zone. So, reading your book, watching old episodes of The Twilight Zone, and then waking up to that article about black actors mattering just totally has thrown me into a very odd loop today. But there was some interesting, in reading your book and reading that article, the one question that I kept having is like, is a lot of this rhetoric because I think when the left is defeated in the late 60s, and Pascal had a really good point. Me and him had a private conversation about this. And I asked Pascal, I said, when do you think the left was defeated? And he said, when the draft was gone and there was no real working class based movement, and the left kind of retreated to academia. And then in the 90s, when we start having, when you think about the Rodney King riots, uprisings, protests, whatever you want to call them, we had Chris Catrone on Thursday, and I wanted to really get into that conversation with him because he talks about it in his piece that we read for the show, about how he didn't like the way that the left handled the riots. And there really was no left at that time, in my opinion, that was really handling the riots. And he spoke to being at a demonstration where Black men didn't want Black women at the demonstration because they didn't have the same relationship to police violence as the men had. So they didn't want any even Black women there. And in the defeat of the left, what it's done in the light of, like, quote unquote Black politics is it really, the nationalist side of Black politics might have been the winner, because that's still what I see in a lot of the discourse. Do you agree, Pascal? That we're kind of stuck in almost late 60s, early 70s posturing?
I think that we've had that problem for a long time without any kind of policy concessions at all coming from that.
And the underclass ideology being kind of a mainstream talking point, it's not gone. I mean, a friend of show had posted on a page that Pascal started, Blacks Against Capitalism, that there's a prequel sequel coming out to New Jack City. And it's going to be called Nino Brown, the monster that Reagan created, or something like that. And this friend of show had wrote about how excited they were about the possibilities of this being a really good exploration of the Reagan 80s. And my response was, I don't think so. I just think the title sounds good. And it's probably going to be more of this glorification of crack era street corner drug dealing porn that we're seeing kind of proliferated through contemporary Black entertainment.
There's a great deal of that stuff right now.
A great deal of it. So coming out of the George Floyd protests is we're getting back to the underclass ideology. And so also for whatever reason, I went to sleep with fucking your book is like on top of me, and the TV is playing, and it's YouTube, and my YouTube is all fucked up, Christine, because I got to make these clips, and I have to watch so much weird shit that my YouTube feed is not cool at all. And
you have an interesting life.
I don't, like, I'm having company later, and if this person sees my YouTube feed, they'll be like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" But anyway, all of a sudden, a news report from the early 2000s started playing, and it was all underclass ideology. It was about Black people. This was in the 2000s in New York, and it was the Black on Black crime narrative. It was an American Justice story from A&E. I have no idea why that showed up. I woke up to that at like 2 a.m., and I was this close to texting Pascal because I knew it would have been 5 a.m. for him, and I would have been okay because he should be up early eating Wheaties and shit. And I was like, I had to check the year. I was like, this is like 2002. It's not that long ago. And the whole story was about these Black people just can't get out of their own way when it comes to gun violence, which again, here we are in 2021. That's still a narrative we're hearing today. Violence is a problem. We can't defund the police because these people just keep shooting each other.
Mm-hmm. Black culture.
How do we get out of this cycle? I mean, if you're asking the question, Marcus, how do we get beyond it? It's like we're stuck in the hamster wheel.
Yeah.
But we're doing the same thing. I mean, for me, it's the politics is doing the same things. It doesn't challenge anything. So we end up having if it's not the black culture of violence, will be also the black culture of the black men disappearing like with the black education. If you carry on doing the politics the same way that it is today, identity politics, this is I call it, then you will have the same. You will have this. You may have a slightly different arguments, but you will end up being the same loop in one way, where we are having still problems. I mean, I can imagine still, like I said, a world where the Black Americans are better. The poor Black Americans are better, but there may be another groups. So the Black Americans, the poor Americans, will arise, and then another groups will go down because they will be seen as the underclass or the bad guys. I think in Europe, when you, at least for us, the Muslims in France, for example, the Muslims are the groups of people that is racialized and explained as not part of the proper French society, that they have to change their name or whatever. So if you challenge those kind of problems with the same arguments that the people are using, then you're not going to change anything. So if you challenge racism with racial thinking and race, you're not going and racial identity, you're not going to change anything. You're just perpetuating the same problem.
Well,
and anti-racism is doing that. It's using racial identities to promote themselves as the good one, but you're promoting the same underlying arguments and other people are using to explain why the blacks are at the bottom.
Let me ask you a question, Christine. And you talked very eloquently about how there are all kinds of varying identities. You even argued that the working class can be an identity. Let me ask you a question. If we are saying that people should not base their politics on their identity, should they base their politics on their economic reality?
It's not that you cannot. If for example, I will support workers if they fight for better wages. Yes. Mm-hmm. And I support black groups, people fighting against racial discrimination. So it's not that I'm saying that it's short term. It depends on what you want. Do you want to just challenge or to support one particular groups and then forget about the others, or do you want to have a world or to change the world in a way that a black or white or workers have a better life than that they have today?
Okay, but so, my question then becomes is that if politics are not rooted in the actual material economic conditions, what is the basis of the long-term political project that you think is helpful for people to engage in?
I'm saying it is economic because for me, it is. We have to challenge the totality of the capitalist social order. So it is economic, and I understand it as two class. The main social conflicts is between the capitalist class and the workers, and you have other social groups fighting with each other. But I'm saying that if you are only considering the black, white, women and lesbian and whatever, you are not challenging the main division that creates. I can explain. The identity politics is only superficially challenging different political groups, different social groups, but you do not challenge, you do not create, you do not fighting for a better world. It's in my head, I see it as a short term. I can support somebody to have a better wage today, but this is it. This is a dead end. Better wage today. Tomorrow, somebody else will ask for a better wage. Yes? And then you fight for that. And then somebody else will say, well, he has a better wage. What about me? So then you will have. Do you see what I'm saying? Is what is your political aim today? What do you try to do? If you want to support a group, the disabled groups or the black groups or the workers group, you can, and you can fight for the resources that you have today. But you do not change anything. You're just fighting for your own group. So what is your political aim? And my political aim is to have a world where individuals and humanity can have freedom and develop. So it means that I cannot only support identity politics, because for me it's a dead end. So if you don't fight for black, tomorrow it will be for Muslims, and then it will be for Jews, and it will be for white people, and then you know. For me, you have to look at what do we want in life, what do we fight, what are we fighting for? If you want to fight for a particular identity groups, please do. But if you are supposedly a Marxist or a left person, and you want to have a society, so not a capitalist social order, but another social order where people will have a different life, then you will have to find the politics that goes against that. So to challenge that, working class politics can be useful, but unfortunately, working class politics is becoming an identity politics, because you're fighting for the interests of the working class. When if you were a Marx, you were fighting for the interests of the working class to challenge or to destroy the working class. If you want to change society, you're fighting for the abolition of class, not for the interests of the working class within capitalism. You don't want to have a better life only for a working class, but you want you're using the interests of the working class to challenge and destroy class itself.
But I think that's the problem, right? It's a lot of people that like to wear the hammer and sickle shirts and be all about it, but ultimately they just want their Democrats who just want a better material conditions for themselves.
You end up being that way.
I don't know if you saw, you got a super chat from Mike V for Vendetta. The idea is to challenge the anti-black policy with a more equitable policy to prevent other groups from being subjected to what impacted black people in the first place. Which I think that's, what Christine was like alluding to, and what I think we all agree with is that if you're going to try and actually solve the issues that capitalism creates, going after those individual issues is going to be largely a futile effort, because capitalism, as we see, can create a ever-ending amount of subjugated masses, and so in order to stop that from happening again, you actually have to overturn the system and then get to a classless society.
Well,
I think I understand the argument. That Christina is making, and it's not an abstract article. It's not an abstract argument, but the argument is that if we're fighting for improving the condition of the working class, improving the condition of blacks, improving the condition of women, we can improve their conditions, but they're still going to be existing in the overall hierarchy of the society as working class, as blacks, and as women. And what you're saying is that the overall goal should be to neutralize the hierarchy that requires them to be categorized as quote unquote working class or black or women overall, and simply be able to be viewed as human beings who can function with a quality of life in society that denies the precarity and immiseration that is normally demanded in a capitalist system. Am I correct in my assessment? Correct me if I'm wrong in the way I'm categorizing what you're saying.
Christine.
Yeah, okay. So, I was thinking, sorry.
Christine. It'll get you every time.
No. So it depends for me, it depends of what you want. We have a capitalist social order, and I am not anti-capitalist just because I'm anti-capitalist. I'm not one of those anti-capitalists saying, "Oh, let's go back to living in nature and go back to the past." No, for me, we have a society today called capitalism that gave us something for humanity. Now, and my understanding is that we, because of what we are today, we can do better what we are. For example, I was writing something on Facebook and I was looking at the cooperation. Capitalism allow humanity to cooperate to produce more. The human cooperation is a very important part of humanity today, and it's something that I would like to keep, because this cooperation allows us to produce more and to produce more and to have better life. But we also realize that today in capitalism, the way it's organized, it's preventing human development. So, for example, because of the way that we are selling our labors, the workers, we don't have the relationship between me and what I'm doing. It's not direct. So I'm saying that I think we are in a stage where we can do better than the social order. So now, how can we do that? The better the social order is, for me, a classless society. Because without the workers, without the alienation between the labor, then you will have better society. If I'm in a capitalist society and I have different groups and I'm supporting only the politics of the black or just think about it. Why would I support the black and then tomorrow not the black woman, and tomorrow the black woman lesbian, and then like I said, the more and more people are becoming more and more small groups. So why should I support the black woman and not about the white male? They also want to have the interest. So if you're only doing your politics on that level, what I call identity politics, which is politics of capitalism, if we only do that, all you're doing is doing that. You're fighting for the resources within the world. I do not want that. It's short term. You basically, it's bourgeois politics, identity politics, whether it's for black interests or white interests or aristocrat interests, it's bourgeois politics. It's politics that keeps the status quo. And for me, my interest in politics is that I believe that humanity, that's why also I'm also really against the notion of race. I believe humanity has the ability to understand and to act on the world and to change themselves. And as long as we keep the politics that prevent us doing that, this is wrong.
Well, what is the first step? And I ask this question to everybody on the panel. What is the first step for us to get beyond where we are and to start thinking beyond race? What is the first step?
Beyond race. I mean, in the book and what I'm arguing, I'm one of those people arguing that we need to challenge the notion of race. But it's not only on the level of ideas, because there is now more and more people who are arguing. I mean, I won't give names, but there is more and more individuals who go and said, let's forget about race. We're all human race. And I don't think it's right and it's wrong. I think it's just too superficial, because they are saying that the problem of race is all about our mind. And if we all forget about race, everything will be okay. But race is real. It's not a biological category, but it's a product of history and our social circumstances. It has effect on people. You cannot just say, forget about race and then just everything will go away. But you have to, for me, is what we need to do is we have to think about, what do we want? What is our aim in politics? What is our aim in life? Do we want to support only one group, or do we realize that the problems today is a social problem, i.e. the capitalist social order that we have to challenge? And then we have to challenge by challenging the politics that keeps the social order the way it is. So we have to challenge all the conservative politics that you can find from the left to the right, because I think the left is as conservative as the right. The politics of the left keeps the status quo, keeps the social order. The politics of the right keep the status quo. Unfortunately, the left is always seen as the most radical, when in fact their politics, when you think about left, use identity politics. This is one of the most conservative politics you could find. And the left are quite happy to use it, and it keeps the status quo. It doesn't challenge the social order. It doesn't challenge a society that is divided into two classes, capitalist and working class. It doesn't challenge a society where the people cannot be free, cannot develop themselves, and cannot be free. That is the aim, I think. Is what is the aim of for humans? What is our goal? What is the future, possible future? And we live in a world where the possible future is that we can go further than what we have today. So we are anti-capitalist because we understand that capitalism today is a barrier for humanity. And the politics that we can do in short term and long term has to be in relation to that future. It's what we want to do. So I can support anti-racist politics if it's anti-racism. So if a black and or other groups don't have the same, I mean, for example, immigrants, for example, a lot of people call themselves anti-racist, but completely forget about immigrants, especially when you look at America. I mean, how many anti-racists discuss the status of immigrants in America? Because they are dividing into the Black Americans and the Black non-Americans and then the immigrants. And, this is just added to the politics. If you don't support, if you can support different groups, but you don't challenge, if you want to challenge the social order, then you have to see which politics help you to challenge. I think I lost my thing. But anyway, I talk too much. You make me like, I'm thinking, anyway, I'm shutting up.
Pascal, what say you? What is the first step? Because people, there's this thing where, someone just said in the chat, like, I hear a lot of sweeping statements, but no roadmap. And first of all, I think that's kind of a shit statement because it's like, look, man, you want someone to tell you what to do, then you're just looking for a leader. And you probably need to stop just looking for someone to tell you what to do. Like at some point, the critique should lead you in a direction where you start to see, okay, well, maybe I need to go down this road.
For me, the first step is always that we have to organize the people who are not benefiting from the current politics and economy that we have in the society. So we actually physically go in those spaces and sit down and talk to those people about, what exactly is their condition and why the current political and economic reality is failing them, and explain to them how there is no limit to the options that they have in terms of demands, and all it's going to take is them being willing to be organized and mobilized to challenge the existing system to meet the demands that they want. I mean, that's the first step for me. And what that means is creating a politics where we say that, okay, the current social order, as Christine says, economic social order, where we have Fortune 500 companies that have more sway and influence on policy than American citizens is the problem. Where we have people who are being paid literally at the same rate of wages that they've been for 45 years is a problem. Where we don't have the capacity to have quality education. I mean, there's a variety of material situations here. How exactly do we get people to stop saying that, it's the wokeness, it's the, it's XYZ identity, or it's those evil, leftists or rightists or this and that, and say that, no, listen, what we have is a country with over $20 trillion in GDP annually that's being earned that is not distributing resources to the majority of people in the society who live in the society, and the resources are trickling upward to a small community. That's basically where I would start.
I feel like even like the question of like where do you start even might be oversimplistic. I think there's like a recognize where the overall left is, which is a fragmented group of individuals within the United States at the very least. I guess ask yourself some questions as far as like the basically of like where is the goal? Because at this point we don't have an organization able to even influence society in a material way. So when we talk about first step of just like building an organization that's able to do so is one thing. But then also too of like, I think that within the United States, I think there's a responsibility for the left to address imperialism, which, as of right now, without an organization to effectively, create any type of change, it's largely just kind of like banging on the door of bourgeois electoral politics. Yeah, and I think with that, with that, as far as like creating that organization, is something that is actually building and then able to deliver material change outside of the established system. But that's something that's like completely outside of the purview of any left organization right now. Can you get a hotel or old apartment complex like taken over? Can you get one built? Can you have this modeled and structured in a way that's actually beneficial for people? Is this outside of the taxes and yeah, like it's like estate taxes and stuff like that, as far as the state model, so like this whole like, oh, well, what do we do first? Well, fuck, there's so many problems, pick one. And then you could talk about what do you do first as far as identifying.
And I think that's what happens. I think, and let me clarify my point a little bit, and I'll take all the negative comments coming my way. That's fine. We're so perpetually online that you're getting hit with so many problems globally, domestically, sometimes even locally, depending on what you're watching, that one's head is constantly spinning. And where do you put that energy? And the thing that I see, and if you're a patron, I posted it up in Patreon, and it's probably going up in a larger publication in the next few weeks. My kind of look at the leftist Twitterverse, BreadTube podcast sphere, where the parasocial relationships sometimes we have with these people turn them into de facto leaders of kind of online movements.
Yeah.
And people get involved with hashtag armies, and then it becomes like, this is real politics. And that's why I think that story was also so interesting to me about that school, in the drama class in Coastal Carolina, because these people were really not really involved in any kind of real politics, but they really thought they were doing something. If I have the power to get a teacher fired for a reply all email, that might have been dickish, but it wasn't racially offensive.
Yeah. No, I don't, and that's just something that we've kind of done it before. It's like these like the what to do with the organizations, and I think people kind of get like this over simplistic take. And, like you see one thing bad about like DSA, and it's like, well, this is like everything, like everything they do is toxic, or ineffectual or whatever. I'd actually take a step back from the organizational standpoint. Join organizations within your community that are doing revolutionary work. Do that. Whatever the name of that organization is, I don't fucking care. No one should. We need to be like results based, not, hey, don't join this because I had a conversation with someone online who now is a representative of that whole organization. Because I think one of the things that the left should be doing is probably just melding. If we can get together, the goal of a society that is classist, where everyone's housed, food security, ability to get educated and self-determination, through work. These are things that if we can all just agree on that, this is what we're moving towards. If you, at that point, propose programs that are in the process of attaining these things,
Mm-hmm.
or get behind somebody who is,
Mm-hmm.
do that, right? So if your issue is housing, it might be some, are we getting, someone to a city council that might be able to pull some sway? Or we organizing just a group of construction workers and trying to build something on some random plot of land? Like this can look a lot of different ways, but at the end of the day, if you can have an understanding that a profit motive need not be in the process of housing.
Understanding certain tax codes, understanding things like opportunity zones, and how amazingly harmful they were as part of the new tax codes, and how only one group of people really came up during those quote unquote opportunity zones. Who pushed for those opportunity zones? People would be extremely shocked. We recently did a pre-record show that'll be airing in the next few weeks with the economist Jax. He actually came on, and we definitely went down some really interesting rabbit holes, and I can't wait for you guys to hear that. But we've been talking for 2.5 hours with Christine and her inner computer demons and technical issues. We got through it all. I knew we would. And now I do want to tell you guys about a little bit of capitalism. And I don't give a shit, because I think these are hilarious. Recently, one of you guys on the show, it was Steve, coined the term Anglo-pessimism. Funniest shit I've ever heard. We made Anglo-pessimism shirts. They're perfect for the holidays. Get them while they're hot. We also have some other shirts. You show me a capitalist, I'll show you a bloodsucker. The ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution.
Amazing.
Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Oh, you can still hear me? Okay, because I got the message that I got disconnected. Okay. But the Anglo-pessimism is my favorite, mainly because I don't think people thought we were really going to make that shirt. I was like, oh, we are making that shirt. Don't you worry. We're making that shirt. Christine Louis-Dit-Sully, thank you very much for joining us. Her book is called Transcending Racial Divisions. Will You Stand By Me? It is out now.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you for taking the time to talk with us. I know it's a little later where you are. And instead of just cartoons that we usually go out with, there was an intro clip that we made for one of our crisis and Black politics shows. Bless you, Pascal. I saw you sneeze, even if you muted. Saw that. You got to close the camera.
I'm sorry. I don't know you, Pascal, but I love your very straight face when he's laughing. Between the two, it's just like, so I'm going to be laughing all night thinking of you three.
Well, I'm glad you picked up on that.
I'm going to have my JDOS merch here pretty soon. Christine, you'll get a free one for the inception of the idea. But I think JDOS tracksuits, that's going to be very powerful.
He's Jamaican, so it'd be Jamaican descendants of slaves.
Jamaican American descendants of slaves.
So J, like seriously, JDOS. I was trying to share a screen and my computer's not letting me for some reason. There we go. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
So we did a clip for the Crisis in Black Politics, and part of the clip that I took is from the actual Gary, Indiana convention in 1972. And also I got a great clip from an old show from the 70s and early 80s called Tony Brown's Journal, where a bunch of Black nationalists are talking about the future of Black politics. So thank you guys. Thank you so much for the super chats. Thank you, Christine. If you guys haven't done it, go get her book. Throw us a comment. Let us know what you think. Holler at us on Twitter. Holler at us on Facebook. Let us know what you think about Christine's book. I rather enjoyed it, especially considering the motherfucking article I read this morning. Black actors matter. Need to get that trending. I'm all for it. So here you go. Oh.
some of the white news media has criticized us for calling this convention and welcoming all of our brothers and sisters. But we shall determine who comes to this convention at the right decision. We demand that any party which asks our support acknowledge the inhumanity every black man, woman, and child faces in 100 different ways each and every day of his existence.
In the history of American politics, there has never been a movement rooted in improving the lives of working class and poor Americans that did not include black people. What are the consequences of contemporary black electoral politics being rooted in the corporate right wing of the Democratic Party with a large number of white progressives to its left? How can working class black politics be brought to life in order to challenge this reality? We will ask former Bernie Sanders communication director Brianna Joy Gray that question and more. This is Revolution.
It could very well be too late for the black man in America. Probably the next 5 or 10 years will indicate whether or not the black man can survive. Our struggle for survival is a very real struggle, and the white man has prepared genocide for black people. Unemployment, the black man is no longer necessary. Unemployment is going to be a way of life for black people. We are going to face increasing dangers and problems as the days pass, and we're totally unequipped as black people to deal with them. We're a part of a slave culture. We have no preparation. We have no black institutions capable of dealing with white racist institutions designed to serve only white people. We must deal with the problem that confronts black people by building black institutions, by understanding that only a separatist position is a viable position for black people. Any organization or any leader in America who today advocates integration is a foe and an enemy of black people and their survival in the coming years.
The Congressional Black Caucus, composed of the 13 black members of the U.S. House of Representatives, believes that we are on the threshold of a new era of political power for blacks, not only in America, but in Africa and in the Caribbean area.
We feel the survival of black America is threatened by racial schizophrenia that plagues a great portion of black leadership. Malcolm called this problem the problem of the house nigger against the field nigger. Its destructive ramifications exist yet today. Black masses are governed and led by an elite few who have split loyalties between their black and white families. These racial schizoids are leading us down the path of racial genocide through the propagation of forced integration and the calculated assimilation. Black people could very well disappear as a people and certainly lose all prospect for black political, economic, and social power annually.
It's getting close to election time, so I thought I'd drop in on my favorite project people, the Evans family. And, of course, my warmest and heartfelt greetings and salutations to you two, Winifreda.
Sorry, I love good times. Anything I can do to put good times on a show, I'm going to do to put good times on the show. So thank you guys for watching. Go get Christine's book. Stay tuned. Next week we'll be debuting the Marcus and Mac combination with veteran Mike Kim. We're gonna talk veteran affairs and we're gonna talk sports next Saturday. So stay tuned. Thank you guys very much. Here's some cartoons and we are out.